All right, so we just met Gatsby, the last chapter, and are about to learn a little bit more about his mysterious history. But I really want to review chapter 3 just so we know where we're picking off for chapter 4. So Nick goes to this massive rager at Gatsby's, and he had a very personal invitation. Nobody gets these personal invitations, but Nick did. So the question remains, why Nick? Why was Nick singled out? Was it just because he's the neighbor or not? We had that interaction with Owl Eyes in the library, and Owl Eyes saying, "Oh my gosh, it's real. I can't believe it. He's a real artist." And so there's this underlying tension in that nobody really believes that Gatsby is a real person, or that his origins or his wealth are actual truth. He is over the top. He is this big, mysterious guy that nobody actually knows. And then we meet Gatsby for the first time, and Gatsby doesn't go out of his way to say, "Oh, hey, I'm Gatsby." He kind of just drops little hints about who he is so that Nick all of a sudden is surprised. Um, and then Gatsby calls Jordan over, and apparently Jordan has been asked to essentially have this like private meeting with Gatsby, and then Gatsby invites Nick to go on his hydroplane. So Gatsby's going out of his way to be neighborly and to get to know Nick. And that's kind of the overarching of chapter 3. So if you guys will open up your books for me, chapter 4 is on page 61. Now, this whole first section is just kind of a list of names about who got to spend time with Gatsby at his mansion. And I'll explain why Fitzgerald spends so much time doing that. But here we go. Let's see. Yeah. On Sunday morning, while church bells rang in the villages along shore, the world and its mistress turned to Gatsby's house and twinkled hilariously on his lawn. "He's a bootlegger," said the young ladies, moving on somewhere between his cocktails and his flowers. "One time he killed a man who had found out that he was the nephew to von Hindenburg and second cousin to the devil. Reach me a rose, honey, and pour me the last drop into that there crystal glass." So again, nobody knows where he's from. There's all of these rumors going on, but a bootlegger is somebody who sold alcohol and made alcohol during the Prohibition when the sale and consumption of alcohol was illegal. "Once I wrote down on the empty spaces of a timetable the names of those who came to Gatsby's house that summer. It is an old timetable now, disintegrating as it folds, and headed, 'This schedule in effect July 5th, 1922.' But I can still read the gray names, and they will give you a better impression than my generalities of those who accepted Gatsby's hospitality, and paid him the subtle tribute of knowing nothing whatever about him." So here we go. Here's the list of all the people who came over to Gatsby's house that summer. From East Egg, then, came the Chester Beckers and the Leaches, and a man named Bunsen, whom I knew at Yale, and Dr. Webster Civet, who was drowned last summer up in Maine, and the Hornbeams and the Willie Voltaires, and a whole clan named Black Buck, who always gathered in a corner and flipped up their noses like goats at whosoever came near, and the Ismays and the Christies, or rather Hubert Auerbach and Mr. Christie's wife, and Edgar Beaver, whose hair, they say, turned cotton white one winter for no good reason at all. Clarence Endive was from East Egg, as I remember. He came only once in white knickerbockers, and had a fight with a bum named Eddie in the garden. From farther out the island came the Cheadles and the O.R.P. Schraders and the Stonewall Jackson Abrams of Georgia, and the Fishguards and the Ripley Snells. Snell was there 3 days before he went to the penitentiary, so drunk on the gravel drive that Mrs. Ulysses Sweat's automobile ran right over his right hand. The Danceys came too, and S.V. Whitebait, who was well over 60, and Maurice A. Flink and the Hammerheads, and Beluga the tobacco importer, and Beluga's girls. So we have this massive list of all these East Eggers. So big names, have had their money for a very long time, all condescending to come and spend time with Gatsby. And here's the list from West Egg. From West Egg came the Poles and the Mulreadys, and Cecil Roebuck and Cecil Schoen, and Gulick the state senator, and Newton Orchid, who controlled films par excellence, and Eckhouse and Clyde Cohen and Don Schwartz the son, and Arthur McCarty, all connected the movies in one way or the other. And the Catlips and the Bembergs, and the G. Earl Muldoon, brother of that Muldoon who afterwards strangled his wife. Duffantano, the promoter, came there, and Ed LeGros, and James B. Rotgut Ferret, and the De Jongs, and Ernest Lilly. They came to gamble, and when Ferret wandered into the garden, it meant he was cleaned out, and Associated Traction would have to fluctuate profitably the next day. A man named Klipspringer was there so often and so long that he became known as the Boarder. I doubt if he had any other home. Of theatrical people, there were Gus Ways and Horace Donovan, and Lester Meyer, and George Duckweed and Francis Bull. Also from New York were the Cromes and the Backhysons and the Denekers and Russell Betty and the Corrigans and the Kellhellers and the Dewars and the Scullies and the S.W. Belcher and the Smirks and the young Quinns, divorced now, and Henry L. Palmetto, who killed himself jumping in front of the subway train at Times Square. Benny McLennan arrived always with 4 girls. They were never quite the same ones in physical person, but they were so identical one with another that it inevitably seemed they had been there before. I have forgotten their names, Jacqueline, I think, or else Consuela, or Gloria, or Judy, or June, and their last names were either the melodious names of flowers and months, or the sterner ones of the great American capitalists, whose cousins, if pressed, they would confess themselves to be. In addition to all these, I can remember that Faustina O'Brien came there at least once, and the Baedeker girls, and young Brewer, who had his nose shot off in the war, and Mr. Albruxberger, and Miss Hogg, his fiancée, and Ardita Fitzpeters, and Mr. P. Jewett, one head of the American Legion, and Miss Claudia Hipp, with a man reputed to be her chauffeur, and a prince of something whom we called Duke, and whose name, if I ever knew it, I have forgotten. All these people came to Gatsby's house in the summer. So he spends literally 2 entire pages listing off all the people who have come over to his house. So the impression can be is that not only West Egg, but also East Egg and film stars and old money and new money are all coming to his house because, either they're friends with Gatsby or they want to take advantage of, and they want to take advantage of Gatsby's wealth and Gatsby's property. And so you have this kind of familiarity that Gatsby is very well known and very well connected. So we are continuing. At 9 o'clock one morning, late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody from its 3-noted horn. It was the first time he had called on me, though I had gone to 2 of his parties, mounted on his hydroplane, and, at his urgent invitation, made frequent use of his beach. "Good morning, old sport. You're having lunch with me today, and I thought we'd ride up together." So if you look at the screen, these are the 2 places that it takes place for The Great Gatsby. So you can see that right now we're in West Egg because we're at the property of Nick and Gatsby, but they're going to be taking the car into New York City. So that's kind of the setting for chapter 4. But as you can see in the picture, this is Gatsby's car. This is a very important vehicle for the rest of the book. And there's a screenshot from the movie of Gatsby and Nick going into New York and having a grand old time. So here we go. He was balancing himself on the dashboard of his car with that resourcefulness of movement that is so peculiarly American, that comes, I suppose, with the absence of lifting work or rigid sitting in youth, and, even more, with the formless grace of our nervous, sporadic games. This quality was continually breaking through his punctilious manner in the shape of restlessness. He was never quite still. There was always a tapping foot somewhere or the impatient opening and closing of a hand. So he's showing great attention to detail because Fitzgerald is revealing that Gatsby is very nervous and is trying to control himself, but also is very agitated for some reason, which we'll find out later. He saw me looking with admiration at his car. "It's pretty, isn't it, old sport?" He jumped off to give me a better view. "Haven't you ever seen it before?" I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, swollen here and there in its monstrous length, with triumphant hat boxes and supper boxes and tool boxes, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down behind many layers of glass in a sort of green leather conservatory, we started to town. I had talked with him perhaps a half a dozen times in the past month, and found to my disappointment that he had little to say. So my first impression, that he was a person of some undefined consequence, had gradually faded, and he had become simply the proprietor of an elaborate roadhouse next door. So he's been there a month. He's interacted with Gatsby either on the beach, in the hydroplane, going to lunch, and he has found little about Gatsby. Gatsby doesn't talk about himself. He doesn't talk about his history. And so Nick, after having this first impression that Gatsby was this major deal, has now lessened that impression because he doesn't know anything about him and there's no way that he's going to find out. So all of his heightened expectations have then fallen short. And then came that disconcerting ride. So they're in the car, and something is going to change that newly founded opinion from Nick. We hadn't reached West Egg Village before Gatsby began leaving his elegant sentences unfinished and slapping himself indecisively on the knee of his caramel-colored suit. So again, he's not finishing his sentences, he's nervous for something. "Look here, old sport," he broke out surprisingly. "What's your opinion of me, anyhow?" A little overwhelmed, I began the generalized evasions that question deserves. "Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life," he interrupted. "I don't want you to get the wrong idea of me from all these stories you hear." So finally, Gatsby is addressing all of these rumors. So the question is, again, are we actually going to get the truth from Gatsby or not? So he was aware of the bizarre accusations that flowered conversation in his halls. "I'll tell you God's truth." His right hand suddenly ordered divine retribution to stand by. So again, it's like when you raise your hand on the Bible, he's raising his hand as he's swearing to God that he's going to tell the truth. "I am the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford, because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It is a family tradition." He looked at me sideways. So again, he's checking. Does he believe me? Is he listening? And I knew why Jordan Baker had believed he was lying. He hurried the phrase, "educated at Oxford," or swallowed it, or choked on it, as though it had bothered him before. And with this doubt, his whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. So Nick's questioning, why is he lying to me? And why is he building up this whole story? What part of Middle West?" I inquired casually. "San Francisco." "I see. So the question is, you guys, is San Francisco in the Midwest?" No. San Francisco is in, Northwest California. And so Gatsby obviously is lying. I mean, that is a blatant lie because that is not the Midwest. Even though he's from there, he should know, right? "My family all died, and I came into a good deal of money." His voice was solemn, as if the memory of that sudden extinction of a clan still haunted him. For a moment I suspected that he was pulling my leg, but a glance at him convinced me otherwise. "After that, I lived like a young Rajah in all the capitals of Europe. Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something that very sad that happened to me long ago." So again, what is the sad thing? So it's Fitzgerald is consistently asking us questions or posing questions to the reader. With an effort, I managed to restrain my incredulous laughter. The very phrases were worn so threadbare that they evoked no image except that of turbaned character leaking sawdust at every pore as he pursued a tiger through the Bois de Boulogne. So again, they're so threadbare, which means obviously Gatsby has repeated this many, many times. "Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die, but I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as first lieutenant when it began. In the Argonne Forest, I took 2 machine-gun detachments so far forward that there was half a mile gap on either side of us, where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, 130 men with 16 Lewis guns, and when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the pile of the dead. I was promoted to be a major, and every Allied government gave me a decoration, even Montenegro, little Montenegro down in the Adriatic Sea." Little Montenegro. He lifted up the words and nodded at them with a smile. The smile comprehended Montenegro's troubled history and sympathized with the brave struggles of the Montenegrin people. It appreciated fully the chain of national circumstances which had elicited this tribute from Montenegro's warm little heart. My incredulity was submerged in fascination now. It was like skimming hastily through a dozen magazines. He reached in his pocket, and a piece of metal, slung on a ribbon, fell into my palm. "That's the one from Montenegro." So he takes out his, war medallion and hands it to Nick as if to validate his statements. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. "Ordere de Danilo," ran the circular legend. "Montenegro, Nicholas Rex. Turn it. Major J. Gatsby," I read, "for valor extraordinary. Here's another thing I always carry, a souvenir of Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Doncaster." It was a photograph of half a dozen young men in blazers, loafing in an archway through which were invisible a host of spires. There was Gatsby, looking a little, not much, younger, with a cricket bat in his hand. Then it was all true. I saw the skins of tigers flaming in his palace and on the Grand Canal. I saw him opening a chest of rubies to ease, with their crimson-lighted depths, and the gnawings of his broken heart.